So yesterday I sent the head off to EBS Racing in Reno for rebuild. It was the only shop I could find that would work on it. Hoffman Machine Shop in Georgia apparently doesn't deal with the older heads anymore. So today I'm going to move to the lower end and start disassembling it. It will go to be boiled at a shop here in Nashville called Shacklet. They do not rebuild engines, they just do machine work. So I will be asking them to boil the block and measure everything to see if it needs to be bored. Hopefully it'll just be a honing and we can put the original pistons back in. Those have to be mic'd as well. So let's get into that lower end and see what we find. So I have a nice piece of cardboard here labeled by cylinder number where I can lay out the components as I remove them. And then the Hayes manual that I'm following as far as the sequence. I've rotated pistons 1 and 4 to bottom dead center, removed the rod cap nuts. On those two, I'll take the oil pickup tube off. Note that there's a washer type assembly on there with folded ears. You've got to bend those over before you can pull those nuts off that. Before we pull the oil strainer off, take a look at the screen. There's a little bit of sludge. Some of that is metallic, just some tiny pieces. I don't know that that's anything to be alarmed about at this point, but just wanted to kind of take a look at that before I pull that off and it falls off. Also, per the Hayes manual, I'm marking the rod caps with just a little punch mark so we can keep those in order. And thankfully those are also labeled on the sides, so that is helpful. Number 2 rod cap was looser than the rest of them. All the others I had to give them a little tap for them to come loose. Number 2, I basically just pulled it right off. So I don't know if that's indicative of any extra wear on that particular cylinder. So now I'm going to start dropping the pistons out the bottom or up through the top, whichever way you want to look at it. So pistons 1 and 4 slid out quite easily. 2 and 3 required a little bit of tapping with the wooden end of a hammer, and I'm going to attribute that to a little bit more corrosion at the top of the cylinder. Perhaps those pistons were at bottom whenever the car sat for a long time and there was more corrosion in those cylinders. I'm going to flip it over and we'll take a look at the other side. That's cylinder 1. Cylinder 2. Cylinder 3. And 4. I think overall the pistons look pretty good. The rod bearings don't look too bad. However, the rings are a different story. They're loose, especially on number 2 here. You can see where that ring is pretty much falling apart. And a lot of that could have happened when I pushed it out. I got hung up on that little bit of corrosion. Yeah, they're just tired, is the way I've heard it described. Tired piston rings. The sides of the pistons don't show where they've been slapping, so I think they're probably good to go. Might want to take them to the machine shop, let them look them over, measure the gaps for the rings, make sure those aren't out of spec. But just trying to document as much as I can, so I have all the information I need when I start to put this joker back together. Bearing cap bolts are off. I'll start pulling the caps off, still keeping everything in order. All right, bearing caps are off. I mean, crank looks in pretty good shape. I did get a couple of burrs trying to get the rear main seal off. Those might fall in between where that seal actually seals, but I'll have the machine shop look at those, see if there's anything can be done about them. Okay, I'm going to get the crank out and set it aside and put these shells, these bearings, alongside their associated caps. Well, this is it. We're down just to the block, and I'm happy there's no major damage. I will try to do some measurements myself. However, I don't really trust my skill sets in that regard, so I want to have the machine shop verify that. There's a couple things on this side. Well, one thing, not sure about this orifice here. I suspect that's just pressed in. I don't know if there's a seal associated with it. I'm going to take a look at the exploded diagram. And then there's freeze plugs on the other side. I need to look up those part numbers to make sure those are still available. They appear to all be the same size. If I don't have to pull them, I'd rather not, because those are pressed in as well. So a couple of questions I need to research online. And here's the crankshaft, which, I mean, it looks pretty darn good to me, except for those couple of burrs that I put back here where the rear main seal is. So we'll let the machine shop take a look at those as well. So now that I've got things organized a bit here in the shop, I'm going to address something in the engine bay that's been a problem for a while. The starter harness is burnt. So that comes from the battery tray, has a jacket, goes down. The long end that's going under the suspension there goes to the starter, and then there's a smaller bit of cable, 2 leads that come up to the alternator. So I want to replace the main hot lead that comes off the battery itself. These are just not very heavy gauge, and they degrade over time. So I'm going to put like some number 2 welding cable in there, and then look at these other conductors that's in that harness. If those are burnt as well under that jacket, I'll replace them. Basically look at rebuilding this harness, and I should have better starter turning speed with better current. Also, I'm going to replace this grounding cable that goes from the ground post on the battery to back behind the firewall. That's pretty corroded and probably doesn't conduct very well. So that'll be a little project that I can do while I'm waiting on the machine shop work. And there's more. There's plenty more. So it's just not only engine rebuild, it's a myriad of other things. Thanks for watching again.